The definition of marginal change: a small increment adjustment to a plan of action. Remember, we talked about profits can be found in the margins. Suppose that you own an airline company that is flying a 200-seat plane across the country. It costs the airline $100,000, which means that on average each seat is around $500. Suppose that the plane, in the last few minutes of departure, decides to sell a seat to a passenger for $300. Should your airline sell that seat for $300 when all of your other seats have been sold on average of $500? Well, to answer that, many variables would have to be taken into place. The outcome of your other passengers who have spent $500, how much have you made off the fuel costs, what are the fuel costs at the time, what regulations do you have, what agreements have you made with other airline companies. There's a lot of variables that can go into that decision. But the thing to think about is in the margin, it seems like right at first blush that the $300 would be a good profit instead of that seat being emptied. But you have to apply the other variables, and that's what we will do. We will take market outcomes and marginal change, put them in a scientific formula, and should give us what we think is our best outcomes so that we can make that decision at that time. In economics, you always want to follow up every decision with data. Every decision should have a data point, a price point, an equilibrium price. You want to make sure that you are able to say, this is the reason I made the decision at this time. Principle number 4, the next slide. People respond to incentives. Incentive is something that induces a person to act. A great story I always tell in person in class is one time we were going to someone had given us some tickets to the Atlanta Braves World Series game back a few years ago, and I was so excited, just happy to be there. Had been a big Braves fan my whole life, and had an opportunity to go to a World Series game and possibly be the game that they would win the overall World Series. It was Game 6, and they actually won the series 4-2. But as we were walking in, there was a vendor out in the parking lot. It wasn't attached to the Braves or Turner Field, but just someone had created this little 4-page magazine. And so it had pictures on it, and it said Braves in the World Series and all this other different stuff. So I walk up to him, and I ask him how much are, these little 4 or 5 page publication that he's printed. And he says 10 cents. Well, the 10 cents shocks me. So knowing how much money I have in my pocket, knowing that I have $2 in my pocket, I say, give me $2 worth, which is 20 of them, right? And so then as I walk off, my wife looks at me and says, why did you buy 20 of those? And to be honest with you, I stopped and paused for a second, and I couldn't answer that because I only needed one. I could only read one. But for some reason, because of the price point, I felt like I needed 20 of them. Luckily, the Braves won the World Series. I was able to give those out to 19 of my friends. But I'll never forget buying something only because of the price point. I bought 19 more than what I should have. And what is that? That's the first thing that should tell us, is he had the price point wrong. Because I would have probably paid $2 a piece for them. Then he would have only had made one and made $2 off of it versus having to print 19, cutting into his cost. So people respond to incentives. I'm sure all of you have responded to coupons, buy things when you shouldn't, or buy more than you should, like I just talked about. People make decisions based on rationale. Economics is based on people making rational decisions. That's not always the case. For example, the pet rock. Millions of people bought pet rocks. That made absolutely no sense, but the market held it, and the creator or the inventor of it made a lot of money off of that. Number 5, principles. Number 5 principle, trade can make everyone better off. Not always. Trade is not a sport, and you don't always have a winner and a loser. But you do always have one team that usually performs a little better than the other team, and they're generally your winner. But trade helps everyone around the world, helps everyone in the community, helps you individually as a family. Trade can be a great thing. So we consider trade a huge part of economics, and we'll talk more about opportunity cost and how you can trade your skills and your talent and your time with someone else so that maybe the use of their skills, their talent, and their time will end up with a better profit margin for both of you. Countries benefit from trade with other countries, and we'll talk about more of that too. Principle 6, markets are usually good. A good way to organize economic activity. You have the firms coming in and selling their products. You have the consumer coming in and buying, supply and demand, and we'll have a whole chapter on that in a little bit too. What's the definition of a market economy? It's an economy that allocates resources through the decentralization of decisions of many firms and households as they interact in the market for goods and services, just like we talked about, supply and demand. You do have a famous economist, or one of the first writers who began putting stuff down, Adam Smith's 1776 work. He talks about the invisible hand of economics, where motivation is guided by self-interest, and that you also have an invisible hand, which could refer to other people coming into the market, for example, government or other big businesses or monopolies, changing the availability of the supply, therefore increasing or decreasing the demand, putting regulations on stuff. So we'll talk more about Adam Smith and his work from 1776 as well. Principle number 7, governments sometimes can improve markets. Sometimes governments can hurt markets. There are two main reasons for the government to interfere with the economy: the promotion of efficiency and equality. That's the big reason that we elect people to go and fight for us, and to bring in efficiency, and also to promote equality, to give everyone a chance. And we'll talk more about that also in monopolies as well. Principle number 8, a country's standard of living depends on its availability to produce goods and services. Differences in living standards from one country to another are quite large. One thing that we value as Americans, others in other countries may not value. Changes in the living standards over time also play a huge role in economics. The explanation of differences in living standards lies in the difference in productivity. So the more you have of something, the least you're going to value. The least you have of something, the more that you will value it. So, principle number 9, prices rise when the government prints too much money. We all know that refers to inflation, which is an increase in the overall level of prices in the economy. Principle number 10, society faces short-run trade-offs between inflation and unemployment. An increase in the amount of money in the economy stimulates spending and increases the quality of goods and services sold in the economy. The increasing the quantity of goods and services sold will also cause firms to hire additional workers. An increase in the demand for goods and services leads to higher prices over time. The short-run trade-offs between inflation and unemployment plays a key role in the analysis of the business cycle. We'll talk more about the business cycle in our next lecture, but just so you know, the definition of a business cycle is the fluctuation in economic activity such as employment and productivity. So the more that you have to produce, the more that you have to hire to produce it. So as long as the demand is high, the more you produce, you'll have more business activity, you'll have more income, or you'll have more revenue. Therefore, you can hire more employees, which then those employees will then turn around, spend more money into the economy, and help grow the GDP overall in general. So that's chapter 1. That's our first slides. This will be on your test. Your test will come from your PowerPoint presentations, your chapters readings, and these lectures. So make sure that you spend a lot of time reading through the chapters and making notes outside the PowerPoint presentations.